All right, so let's take a look at the implementation of. Oh, oops! I didn't mean to do that. The implementation of this application that shows how you can navigate between screens, right? That are related to one another, navigating through several one-to-many relationships, right? So it all starts with this app.js that we looked at yesterday, right? And notice that I've added quite a few other screens, right? Each one of these screens will be receiving the navigation property, right? That will allow them to navigate from one screen to the next. Right? It will also make them participate in the stack. Right, so they will allow you to go back and forth from one screen to the next. Right, so these first lists over here. Let's start off with the first one right here, course list. Right, so this course list is rendered here. If you click on courses, right, it renders this list of courses. Right, it's this list of courses is being retrieved from a URL. From a server that is running at localhost 8080, it's this API. Right, this API is retrieving all these courses. So that list of courses is what is being rendered dynamically here. Okay, so let's take a look at the implementation. So this is course list. So course list is declared up here, course list, on the components. And it's a code we just looked at a little earlier. Right, it's the course list. We have the navigation options of courses. And we're doing the fetch right here in the constructor. Right? And then we're passing the courses as a state, which is then rendered down below. Okay? It's being rendered down below. And then we iterate over the list of courses to render individual list items. All right? Notice that this has also an onPress that will navigate to the module list, right? Which is the module list is declared in the stack over here, right? Module list is declared right there, right? So it's going to be rendered right. We're going to navigate to the module list, and when we go to the module list, we pass as argument the course ID as well. Right. So in the module list, we did something similar. Right. We initialize the state. We configure the title, right? So that when we click on a particular course. Right, we navigate to the modules, and this API is this API right here is API course ID module. So that will look something like this. For instance, if you know the ID of a course, right, you can grab that and say 1/module. It returns the modules for that one course. Right, and this is exactly what's being rendered on that screen. Right, and the way we are retrieving that is we are retrieving it in the componented mount. Right, these are retrieving the course ID from the parameters, and saving it in the state for later purpose, so we can use it later on. And we're doing the API fetch. Typically, all these fetches, ideally, they would be stored in a singleton. Right here, I'm taking a shortcut. All right, I'm doing it right here in the componented mount. But ideally, it would be in a separate service. Right, it would be either a course service or module service, right, or lesson service, and they would not just have this get, right? It would have a post, it would have a put, it would have a delete, right? Now for this assignment, you only really need the gets for these over here, right? So I'm okay with you taking some shortcuts for these 3 or 4 elements, right? These lists. But when you get to questions and exams, right? Use proper design patterns, right? So since you're going to have to be able to create new exams or create new questions or delete questions or update questions, right? Don't have these fetches all over the place, right? Instead encapsulate them in a proper singleton service, like we did, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, right? We encapsulated all fetch and all data access into a singleton design pattern. Okay, so don't have these fetches like this, like I have here, all over the place. Right, have them properly in one single place, and return you return whatever the fetch returns, or return at least this then, right? And then from the outside, you can then use the second then to wait, right, for the response to come back from the server. That's okay, right? So have the service elements, just functions, return the promise so that the component can then render these. All right. So yeah, I don't want to see this. You could do it in my code, but don't do it in your own. All right. Don't do what I do. Do what I tell you. Okay, so this is retrieving the modules and saving in the state, and then we're just mapping over the states and rendering every individual list item. When you click on the list item, we navigate down to lesson items list, and we pass the module ID, and the module ID is listed here. The lesson list. Here's the lesson list, which does exactly the same thing. But this one is, again, goes to the API, retrieving the course and the modules and the lessons, which I can show you here would be if you go down to this particular module. Right, we can look at the lessons, and those are the lessons in that module, which are rendered here as the lessons. Right. All right, so this goes a little further. So this is what we already covered in the slides. All right. So we just went over real quick what we just looked at in the previous slides. Right? So that's go a little further. Right? What we'd like to be able to do is look at, well, how do you handle widgets, and that a widget could be an exam, and that an exam contains questions, right? Which is the focus of this assignment. All right, so let's look at that. Okay? And I think I've gotten you a little bit far, so you should be able to reuse a lot of this. Okay, so here it is. So the first part here is that we're going to navigate to a widget list, right, which is going to show all the widgets in a lesson. Okay, so that's when we let's look at that. Notice that we're passing the lesson ID so that we can retrieve the widgets for that particular lesson. Yes, right, which you should already have something like that in the previous assignment, right? Which you retrieved the lesson. So you should already have that somehow. Anyway, so let's see. Let's look at the the widget list. So the widget list is very similar, right? It's notice that it's using a shorter URL. See that? Notice that I am not building /API course module lesson. I only have the lesson, right? And then the ID of the lesson, and then I retrieve the widget. So that's a shortened RESTful API, right? I only need this context. Right? I don't need the course. I don't need the module. Right? I only need the lesson. All right? So I'm passing that, and I'm retrieving the widget. Let's see what that returns. That returns, let's see. So that's, so I have lessons, so I'm guessing state 1. Let's see what that returns. Okay, so it returns these 3 widgets, right? That they all happen to be quizzes, right? Notice that notice it has a widget type, which is an exam, but it could be a different widget type, right? It could be a video widget type. It could be a heading widget type, right? It could be a link widget type. All the different widget types that we covered in the previous assignments, right? Here for this assignment, I only really care that you touch upon just exam widgets, right? So don't waste time trying to recreate any of the other widgets, right? Just focus on the exam widgets. Yes? Okay. All right. So this lists these widgets, and on the server side, we already saw how this is implemented, right? We saw that there is a. We already saw that we have widget as a data model. And notice that it has a widget type, it has a text, it has an ID. I don't remember. I think in the previous assignment there was quite a few other elements. I only had these 3. But it does have a many-to-one back to the parent lesson. And the lesson has a one-to-many with the widgets, right? So there's a both ways. Also notice that I am not ignoring the lesson, and notice that it does come back. See that? It comes back. The lesson comes back as an embedded object inside of the widget, right? So typically we don't want that. Typically we don't need that. So I'm going to add the ignore, meaning when you render the widget, I don't need the lesson, right? Because I already know who your parent is, right? So do not bother rendering this. Don't send it back. Don't send it back to me. So that ignore. So if we restart. Wait, why is this? Is this blocked somewhere? Is this not running? Oh, here are the buttons. I couldn't find the buttons. Yes, I know. Oh, don't tell me I have already an instance running. It grew. Did it refresh? Oh, it didn't restart. How do I kill it? How do I kill it easily? I have a slow way of doing it. How do?
From Java, kill something from if you kill the Java.
I guess I could just kill it from here. I hope I didn't just kill WebStorm. Okay, let's restart it. All right, let's see. Okay, it's running. Right, so if I refresh here, notice that now it doesn't contain the lesson. See that? Because I said ignore it. Do not include the lesson. All right, so I have these three quizzes which are currently being rendered here, right? If I go to React and I go to state, notice that these are the three quizzes, right, that we're rendering. All right, so let's see how that's implemented. On the data model side, we have widget, which is going to be a base class, right? It's going to be a base class, and there's going to be different types of widgets, of which exam is just one type of widget. Yes? And notice that we're using the single table strategy. That means that any fields that any base, any derived classes have are going to be collapsed into this one table. Right? So let's look at the table. The table should be called widget, and we should find ID, text, and widget type in there. So if we go there, we go to widget. Do we have widget here? Yep. If I do search. Indeed, we have, there it is. We have the ID, the text, the widget type. Yes? These three are there. Right? Plus, since we're using the single table strategy, right, we have a D type in there. See that? That tells me that this is an exam. Right? Or if this were a YouTube video, then it would have a YouTube, the name of the class. Right? This is the name of the class that was used to instantiate this. Okay? Plus, notice that this other stuff, the description, the title, right? Those are what? Those are part of the derived class, right? So the derived class is the exam. So exam here. Notice that it extends widgets. See that? Right? And it adds the fields title and description, right? Which indeed they're there. See, the title and description are there, right? So they're being collapsed right from the derived classes up to the single table, right? And that's the strategy we've been using in the previous assignment, okay? And that's not the strategy you're going to be using for the next assignment, for the current assignment, right? All right. So anyway. We have the list of questions, and now the question, again, is that it's going to be a base class. So So just like the widget is a base class and exam inherits from widget, we have here a base question of which several types of questions are going to inherit from. Yes? So here's the base question. And notice that it establishes the strategy, the joined strategy, right? Which I'll be okay with either you using joined or table per class. Either one is fine, right? Just remember that if you're using joined, the generation type, use identity here. But if you're using per class strategy, use auto. Right, that's the only difference, right? Other than that, everything else is automagical. So we have the ID, the title, and the subtype. So those are all part of the question table. So we'll see here that there's a question table somewhere here. There it is. We can look at the content of that. And we have 2 questions. And notice that the question has points, a subtitle, title, and type. The exam ID is a foreign key back to the widget it belongs to, right? The exam it belongs to. Notice that there's no exam table. See that? There's no exam. Even though there's an exam class, there's no exam table here, right? Because we use the joined, what is it we use? the single table strategy, right? The denormalized version, right? So there is no exam. So this exam ID is actually pointing to the widget parent, right? The base one. Also notice that here we're using a type field, which is one that I am keeping track of. This is not JPA keeping track of the type, right? Because we're using a joined or per class implementation. It doesn't keep track of the type. The name of the table is enough to know what they are, right? But the name of the table never gets it to the client. The client doesn't know, right, the table that you're using or the class that you're using. Well, so somehow we need to discern, what are you? Are you this type or that other type? So I have an additional type field, right, so that it gets back to the client. So that when I get to the client, I can say, oh, I want to show you this form or that other form. Right, I can navigate either to the fill in the blanks editor, or I can navigate to the true or false editor, depending on the type. Make sense? Right. So let's see how that works. Also, here's the base question. So here's the base question, of which we have 3 types of questions. Well, 4 actually, of which I've shown you here 2. You have the true and false. Notice that true and false extends question, right? But we're using the joined strategy. So there is a table for that. There's a table for this class, right? And we have the other class is the multiple choice question, which is also extends question. And because we're using the joined strategy, there'll be a table for this class too, right? And if we look at here, we'll notice that there is indeed. We have the true-false question. There it is, right? Of which we have just one. Right? There's only one true-false question. It has its own field is true. Plus, it has this ID matches the ID of the question. We have 2 questions, right? So there's 2 questions. This over here. There's 2 with ID 1 and 2. The first one is going to be a true-false, and the second one is going to be a multiple choice. So here's our true-false question, which has the ID, which matches 1, the 1 here, this 1 right here. And then we have the multiple choice. We also have a question there whose ID is 2. That 2 matches this ID, this question 2 right here. All right, because it's joined. It's joined, right? Plus, the multiple choice has a couple other fields. It has the options. Here I chose the new line as delimiter for the options. Right, so presumably when you render them, the choices, you would use that delimiter to know which are the choices that you're going to render. Yes? Right? So you can capture in one single text area. Right? So you can one choice per line. Okay? You could use different things. Maybe you want to use tabs or commas or semicolons or some other character, special character to delimit the options, right? Also, the correct option. So if you put them in different order, you can tell me, well, which one is the right, which is the right option, the correct option. But you're free to model any which way you want that. All right, excellent. So that's how it's being stored on the client. On the client, let's go back to the widget list. So in the widget list, we're rendering all the widgets. In this case, the 3 widgets that we have is three exams, right? Well, not that you would have 3 exams in one lesson. That makes no sense, right? Probably have one exam per module, maybe, right? So it's listing the. All right. So notice here, ideally, we're going to go to the question list. But if this is an exam, right? If it's an exam, I want to list the questions, right? If this is a YouTube video, then I would go to a YouTube editor, right? If this were a heading, then I would navigate to a heading editor. But that's not required in this assignment, okay? So I'm just giving you directly the question list. So this navigates to the question list, right? So that if you click on this, it goes to the question list. This is the list of questions. So the question list is this one. And what does it do? It takes for the exam ID, it retrieves all the questions in there, right? And this is mapped to the exam service. There's a service that I do all the exam stuff in here. There it is. So there it is. So if I say exam, for the exam ID, give me the question. And I use the exam repository. So for each data type needs to have its own repository. We pass the exam ID, it retrieves the exam, and then I retrieve all the questions. That's how it renders all the questions over here. Right? We can look at the query here. It's let's see. If we want quiz number 1, we can say that we have exam question retrieves those 2 questions, right? It's hitting this URL right here. It's hitting this URL right here. Once I have an individual question, if this is question number 1, I have other queries that can retrieve an individual multiple choice question or an individual true/false question if you tell me the ID, right? And it uses its own repository. You have to have, each one of these has to have its own repository so that it can either return a true/false question or a multiple choice question, right? So it knows what to retrieve for you, right? And this is just an ID, right? Here's the question ID. So if we use this, right? And this is, oops. So this is a multiple choice. It's this one. So that's number 2. So let's go to 2. It retrieves the multiple choice question. Yes.
Go back to the Spring Boot page.
Yep.
If you had like one method that just looked up, I guess you can't find it by the ID because I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't do like casting or forced casting. You can't do that. Each one has to have its own repository, right?
So if you, let's say you said you were returning a base question, but let's say you get it from a true/false question, the true/false return.
Yep.
Will the JSON be just the things?
Only for so the JSON only knows how to render a list of questions, and question doesn't have its true, doesn't have the correct one, doesn't have the options, doesn't have any of that, right? So it doesn't know how to cast down, right? Cast down to the children in inheritance.
You have your repo. You actually get something from your repo that's
Yep.
multiple choice. You just say you're returning a base question. Will it actually?
Oh yeah, so you can cast up. Yes, you can cast to the base one. Yes, you can but then JSON will only serialize the fields in that type.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it loses all the other ones, right? Even though you're casting, right? But it does since because question doesn't know anything about all the children, right? You would need something like a friend in like in C++. You could do like friends, so you can have like the parent look into the children's fields. You can't do that in Java, right? Well, I don't know. Can Java 8 maybe do that? I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, so you need an individual endpoint, right, for each individual type. And so if we have the other question was number 1, that was a true false, and it's mapped to true false, right? So this would be true false with ID 1. So this would be true false with ID 1. So true false ID 1 retrieves that one true false question with the true is true. Yes. Excellent. So that's being used on the client. This type allows the client to decide which editor should I show you, right? If it's a true false question, I should show you the true false editor. If this is a multiple choice question, I should show you the multiple choice editor, right? So back on the client, right? Once we render the list of questions, notice that the list of questions has an onPress that checks to see the type. See that? It checks to see the type. If the type is true false, I'm going to navigate to the true false question editor. Right? If instead the type is multiple choice, I'm going to navigate to the multiple choice question editor. Okay. Perhaps you can have a better solution to this, where you navigate to a single editor, right? And that single editor can make that decision, right? Because you pass it the question ID, right? And depending on that ID, it knows the type, and depending on that type, you could have a switch, right? That then only shows the editor for that type of question. Right, that would be a nicer implementation of reusability, right? You're reusing almost like object-oriented component, like an object-oriented component where you can inherit from those kinds of things, right? But that's an alternative. So you can do it here from the parent and deciding to go to different children, or the child, right, could decide which to show internally depending on the type, right? So again, you can do it here in the parent. Or you can do it in the children. That's up to you. And then these question editors are individual. They're part of the navigation stack. There they are. They're listed in the navigation stack, right? And they implement just a form. These are the same forms we looked at yesterday, right? These are the same exact forms. One had a true/false checkbox, right? Whereas the other one just had an input field. It had an input field where you can type the different options. Okay. All right. So I'm going to make this available so you can take a look at it, use it as much as you want, modify as much as you need, and hopefully it'll get you started. All right. All right. Awesome.